I was supposed to talk about barley NVTs, and I'm not going to talk about barley NVTs, and I'll give you some reasons why. But I'm going to talk about some new options where seed available for 4 new varieties this year. So, get this thing to work. Okay, so basically last year was the year of issues for the barley NVTs. Disease didn't get you, then you lodged at harvest time, you lost heads, or you had weather damage. So basically, it's very difficult to make broad comments about variety performance based on the 2011 NVT results. If you're selective, you can pull out trials and comparisons. You've got to be very cautious about using individual trials and basing decisions on those results from the 2011 season. And I'll just talk about disease as one example. So we measured 9 of the NVT trials last year. I've just selected 3 of the varieties that we measured disease on. This is a combination of parody mildew, net type net blotch, spot type net blotch and barley leaf rust. And you can see in 8 of those NVTs, the levels of disease in at least 1 or 2 of the varieties was above 5%, indicating that yield loss was likely to be present due to disease in those sites. And particularly for Baudin, the yields of Baudin were significantly affected by disease last year. So any comparison against Baudin is not going to reflect long-term on-farm performance of the variety in trials. Okay, so let's talk about what's coming up. Okay, what's in the pipeline for release? So there's 11 varieties in the current Barley Australia pipeline. 2 of them are looking at potential accreditation this year. There's a few more in 2013 and a few more in 2014. What this table does is segment the varieties into different potential markets that they might be accessing. So some of them are intended to have a quality profile which matches that of Baudin, which is obviously our benchmark variety for a high diastase, high fermentability type. Then we've got some that match a Gardner style quality. We've got some that the domestic market wants for domestic brews, and then we've also got Henley, which is in between potentially the Gardner and the Baudin style for its diastatic power anyway. So that's what's coming, and as most of you will be aware, it's a long time frame between release and actually getting market acceptance, so that's quite complicated, the whole process from now. What I'm going to do is just briefly talk about 5 varieties. Bass, Scope, Henley, Westminster, which is not highlighted, and also Commander, and just try and context them in a broad as to where they might sit against current established varieties. Now I've got lots of data like this. This is my own data. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go through the nuances of each variety, so I'm only going to give you the cover page today on varieties. Let's pick up Commander, okay? So we've had Commander in trials since 2004. This data set on the table is from 291 side-by-side comparisons with Baudin. So they were shown side-by-side in 291 different comparisons. It's a combination of CVT, it's a combination of NVT, and the bulk of it, 80% of the data set, belongs to the agronomy work conducted by the department. So it looks at time of sowing, nitrogen rate, whatever different combinations in that data set. So what I pulled out is just direct comparisons against Commander. Now, in terms of Commander, seed will be available this year, and it's a new variety that I think growers will be interested in. In terms of performance, if we're going to use Baudin as a benchmark, essentially it's higher yielding than Baudin. It's got a similar hectolitre weight, slightly plumper in the area where receival is important, and it's got a similar grain plumpness, grain brightness. So basically, what does this mean? Okay, from a yield point of view, it matches Bull Oak. Okay, which is essentially our yield benchmark from the malting varieties. The grain plumpness is between Baudin and Flaming, which indicates that, okay, it's not going to be as reliable as Baudin, as that's Flaming from a malting point of view from screenings, but it's going to be better than Baudin and Bull Oak. Weaknesses, nothing major, perhaps S to VS for barley leaf rust. It does have intermediate resistance to parody mildew, so that's obviously a bonus. Low protein potentially an issue because it's high yield potential, and it does have a market. Okay, so there is a market in Perth for Joe White maltings for this particular variety. So we can be confident that if it is growing over the next 1 or 2 years, that supply will be, if it meets malt specification, will be purchased and used domestically. Is it worth sowing? Yes, if you're in the Kwinana zone. If you're outside those zones, then basically there is no export market for this variety at this current stage, and the market for this variety is purely domestic in the first couple of years at least. And seed is available. Okay, let's talk about Henley. So this is one of the new options that is coming into the marketplace. We've got 79 side-by-side comparisons, and we're still processing some of our data from the 2011 cropping season, so we'll be able to add to this data set. Where it fits relative to Baudin in our observations is that it below 2.5 tonnes, our data would suggest there is a yield penalty of Henley versus Baudin, but certainly above 2.5 tonnes it is higher yielding than Baudin. Hectolitre weight, clearly lower than Baudin. Screenings wise, it's actually lower than Baudin and slightly darker coloured kernels. So what does this mean? From a yield point of view, in high yielding environments it's a strong performer. So in the 3 tonne plus environments it can yield very well. It's got a moderate grain plumpness, so it is an improvement over Baudin and Bull Oak, so that's going to be useful, but it is not as plump as say Flaming. The big issue that probably that may present an issue on farm would be hectolitre weight, and our data would suggest it's 2 to 3 kilograms per hectolitre weight lower than the established varieties, and so there may be situations where that could cause growers to drop from malt to feed because of hectolitre weight. Yes, it is in accreditation. But there's no established market for Australian-grown Henley into China. But Henley is exported out of Europe into China, so the Chinese are familiar with it, and current posting prices for Henley in France posted about $3-4 lower than the benchmark variety Scarlet. Is it worth sowing? Yes, if you're in high rainfall areas and you're chasing parity mildew resistance because it's got MLO and it's got barley leaf rust resistance. Is it higher yielding than, say, the feed benchmarks out there? I would suggest that the NVT data would suggest not, and our observations would suggest it's not higher yielding than those options. But seed is available for this year for sowing, so if you want to contact Tim about that particular variety. The other one is Westminster. Again, we've got 51 observations for this particular one. Baudin wise, similar yield, hectolitre weight, perhaps slightly lower, similar screenings, perhaps slightly darker. In simple words, it's probably a disease-resistant Baudin, but with quite a different quality profile. So yield's okay, it's average plumpness, slightly darker, it's resistant to almost all the diseases except spot type net blotch. There's no established market for exports, although it is an accredited variety in the UK. But I'm not aware of any exports out of the UK into China. Worth sowing, I think it's got limited opportunities. We'll be competing with, say, Commander in the marketplace, and clearly the current feeds would out-yield it in those 4 tonne or below situations. Seed is available. I don't expect this variety to have much opportunity in WA, but I suppose time will tell in terms of if it gets accredited, and secondly whether or not the market actually takes it out of the state. Okay, the next variety is Bass, and so in terms of, we've got a lot of experience with Bass, so we've had it since 2004, we've got over 300 side-by-side comparisons, so we can be pretty confident in what we think its performance is. Relative to Baudin, below 2.5 tonnes the data would suggest it's slightly lower yielding, and above 2.5 tonnes it suggests it's actually higher yielding. Hectolitre weight wise, it's probably 1 to 2 units lower than Baudin. Screenings wise, it's actually plumper than Baudin, and it's got a similar grain brightness. So what this means from an agronomic fit, probably in those 3 tonne and above, 3.5 tonne environments, then that's where it's probably going to stand out relative to some of the other current malt options. The big bonus is it's plump, okay? So it's similar to Flaming from a grain plumpness, which adds to reliability, and much plumper than Baudin. It's rated as MS to mildew, so that's not where we want to be as an industry, but it's a massive step up from Bodan. It'll give you confidence that you can manage early mildew infections, but it's not as good as the MLO types like Henley and Westminster. It's in accreditation, but there's no established markets yet. We're waiting for a report to come out early March, indicating whether or not it has completed stage 2 of the accreditation, but we expect it to suit current Bodan customers. Is it worth knowing? Yes, if accredited, and it will be a future alternative to Bodan in terms of that semi-dwarf type with short straw. And subject to accreditation, seed will be made available by Intergrain. And the last one we get asked lots of questions about is scope. Okay, we've got 121 odd comparisons in our work. For all intensive purposes, scope is a purer form of bull oak in terms of the agronomic performance. So it's got the same yield, perhaps got 1 or 2 or 3% lower screenings in that area where it's important for malting barley. It's got the same weaknesses. The heads fall off if you have head loss situations. If you've got lodging events, then scope will lodge. It's in accreditation. It's not due to complete until 2013, but you'd obviously expect it to suit current bull oak customers. Is it worth sowing? Yes, if it gets APMA VOA approval for the Intervix, and if it's mould accredited. The problem we've got at the moment is that the co-binning will not be allowed with bull oak at this current stage, and so we'll have separate segregations for it, which is going to cause nightmares on receival, and seed is available for that particular variety. And that's it.
Like Chris Wilkins, why is co-binning not being considered scope? Are they considered two different in their malting characteristics, or is it some other?
Okay, so I've written to Barley Australia asking for a response about the co-binning strategies and stuff with bull oak and scope, and at the moment they're saying that they're genetically different and they will not be allowing a co-binning strategy, and that growers who declare scope as bull oak on delivery potentially will be checked and will get caught and then obviously fined as a consequence. Look, this is a very emotive subject about co-binning, and I suppose we'll just keep pressing ahead with industry about the practical realities of managing these varieties if we assume that they are of similar quality. And that's the assumption is because it's a mutation derived from bull oak and it's been selected for IT tolerance, then it should be the same. One of the people that are involved in the breeding of the varieties is here. He might be indicated about whether it actually is the same quality or not, but until the reality is it's got a different name, and I don't think we'll allow co-binning, but I think stay tuned. The industry has tried it with other varieties, but not with this particular concept, so yeah, it's going to get messy, that one.
One more question, gentlemen.